Hi, I'm James. I work for Automatic. If you haven't heard of us, one of the things we're most well known for is WordPress.com, which is hosted WordPress website. I work on the native apps team. We have 3 big apps. Simple Note for keeping notes, WordPress for managing WordPress websites, which isn't just sites we host, it's any open source WordPress website, and WooCommerce, which is commerce for WordPress sites, so you can sell things on your site. We've recently announced we've acquired Tumblr as well, so that one's coming into the fold. I just want to start with a quick show of hands. Who is familiar with the concept of feature flagging? Okay, and who of you are actively doing it in your apps at the moment? Okay, cool. There's plenty of people who haven't, so that's good. So I want to start just by talking about our release cycle. As I mentioned, we've got 3 main apps, and we do releases every 2 weeks on a schedule. Like clockwork, every 2 weeks we have a new release out in the App Store for each app for both platforms. And it all kicks off. We have our develop branch where all of our pull requests are merged into, and every other Monday we do a code freeze. So we fork off a new release branch. Keynote will do anything. Whee! Which is here, and we'll send out a test build of the code to a pool of testers. We've got a build that goes to Hockey app, which is now in Microsoft App Center, and we also send it out to test flight on iOS. So on our release branch, we don't do any new feature development there. For the next 2 weeks, we might do fixes if people find issues in the test builds. We'll send out more test builds as we fix things, and then after that 2 weeks has elapsed, we'll do a final release. Meanwhile, we'll continue feature development on our develop branch, and we don't generally do long-running feature branches. We'll merge in often, so you might get incomplete features going into there. But then, without fail, 2 weeks later, at the same time as we do that final release of the last build, we'll do a new code freeze, and we'll have a new release branch, send out a new test build, and the whole thing starts again. So this is great. This works really well for us because we've got a really regular release cycle. We know exactly what's going in each release. But if you're not ready for it, it can cause some issues. So as I mentioned, we're still doing development on that develop branch while the release is frozen. Without fail, that release trainer is going to come along in 2 weeks' time and cut off a new release branch. You could be 5 pull requests through a 10 pull request feature, and it's not complete, and you can't just ship that to a user because it's going to be really broken. You might want your changes to only be seen by your beta test users for a couple of releases. You might not want it at the end of that 2-week code freeze. You might not want it to go to everybody on the App Store. And likewise, your beta users might uncover an issue, and while you were planning to go to the App Store, you might have to roll it back for a release while you fix some things up. Luckily, feature flags help fix all these issues. I should have called this talk Fun with Flags, I missed a trick there. So feature flagging is a way we can gate in development features, so we can continue to work on them and test them without exposing them to all of our users. At their most basic, they're just conditional statements that control which kind of code path is used, which bits of UI you display to people, which menu options you display. And it's generally based on which build of the app is running for a particular user. And it's not just limited to UI, you can also swap out entire sections of backend logic using feature flags as well. So I just want to talk about how we do this at the moment in the WordPress app and our other apps. And I'll mention as well, this is also all client-side local feature flagging. You can do remote feature flagging using something like Firebase Remote Config, where you can turn things on and off remotely. It's not something we do at the moment, so I'm not going to cover that. So, first of all, you need to think about the conditions that are going to determine which build of the app your features are going to appear in. And for us, that's based on the current build configuration. So in Xcode, in our project settings, you can add build configurations. So we have a bunch of different ones, depending on which group of users are going to be using the app. So debug is just when you're working on your machine, it's your local development debugging build. Release is the one that goes to the App Store and also to our test flight users. We've got internal, which is the hockey app group of testers. And then we've got an alpha configuration, which is all of our pull requests. Our continuous integration can generate an installable build for somebody, and that uses that configuration. So to be able to do something with these at runtime, we need to pull them into the code of our app, essentially. So we'll start off by creating an enum where we just define each of those configurations we have in our set up in our project. So as I mentioned, we've got developer, branch test is the alpha one, pre-release testing is the hockey app, and then app store is the final release build. Next step, how you actually determine which of those build configurations you're running. You can add Swift flags, which are picked up again at runtime. So we've got debug in debug mode, alpha build in alpha, no flag in release. And then in code you can just have a simple if statement like this, which will tell you whether that flag is defined for the build of the app that's running. So this is this current property is part of our enum, which I just showed you. And at runtime this will just tell you, is it the debug build, is it the alpha build, is it the internal build, and it'll give you the right case for the enum. Our features themselves are defined in a separate enum, which we call feature flag. So every time you start a new feature that you perhaps only want to hide from a certain set of users, you can just add a new case in here. So these are just perhaps some things we've been working on. And these are the things that are going to be enabled or disabled based on your build configuration. If you want to use it with Objective-C, which we need to because some of our app is in Objective-C, you have to make your enum using base type like int and at Objective-C. So next you need to determine for each of those whether it is enabled or not. And again, this can just be a simple conditional. So we'll switch on the enum, and then for each feature you just define when you want it to be enabled. So you could just return true if you want it to be enabled for all of your builds. This particular feature is only enabled if the current build configuration is the local developer version. Enhanced site creation here is enabled if it's a local developer or a pre-release build. This is just a custom operator we've got which says whether this build configuration is within this group of configurations. So it's handy if you want it to be part of multiple configurations. And perhaps this one is available in everything apart from the App Store. So once we've got these set up, how do we use them? It's pretty straightforward. We can, somewhere in our code, say this feature, my awesome new feature, needs an action adding to an alert controller to display it. Perhaps it's an extra option for the user to pick. You can just check if that feature flag is enabled for this build, and then either add that action or don't. And often when you start off working on a feature, you will define it to only be available for local development, just while you're getting it going. Then later on you might open it up for testing by other users, and then finally you might just set it to true so that everybody can use it. I'll come back to this a bit later. So I'll do a really quick demo just implementing one of these flags. Whoa, that's not right. Sorry. So here, this is the WordPress app. This is our current feature flag file. There's a bit of extra stuff in here which I haven't covered, but the main bits are the same. So this is part of the WordPress app, and we've got a section called Me, and I've been working on a new header for this section that uses space a bit more, shows a bigger image. So what I'll do is I'll add a new case for my feature.
You've lost video.
Oh,
It's fine.
that's great. Okay, cool. And I'll call it new me header. And then I need to define in our enabled property whether it will be enabled or not. So I'll add it to the bottom. And I'll say this time it's going to be available just on the local developer version of the app, so debug builds. Next I need to use that in my code, so I know in the me view controller, which is the one displayed here, there's this function which generates the header that we display at the top. So I can just go in there and check if that feature flag is enabled. And if it is, oops, that's not it. Then I can use my new me header view, which I've written in advance. Otherwise, I'll just use the old code path. So if I build and run, hopefully Xcode won't take too long. I did a build just before the talk, so it would hopefully be warmed up, but it's quite a big project. Yay. Oh no, build failed. Oh, no. Yay, live coding. Oh, I've got another switch in here which I didn't cover, which just gives us a description of the feature flag, so I just need to fill that one in as well. New me header.
What is the description used?
We'll see in a minute. That's something I added yesterday in preparing for this talk. I thought, we can do something else with this. And now this is the time where Xcode is not going to do anything. One more try. Very occasionally this happens where you can't even stop the build and you just have to... Okay.
While Xcode is restarting, do you find you get conflicts in that file because everyone's presumably got lots of developers maintaining that same file?
Unfortunately, no. Like, there's not too. It doesn't change too often. Okay. Like most features we add are going to take multiple sprints to implement, so new ones won't go in very often.
Yeah.
And then the if you change which builds it's available in, gets pretty good at working out, you know, which bits of the file has changed, so it's generally not been an issue for us so far. Or if it is, it's easy to resolve. Right, I've restarted Xcode and now it's not even building. Fantastic. Okay.
I can ask another question past that.
I'll come back to that in a second because I've got another way of showing you that. Oh no.
The demo demons are striking.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that people delete their features after they leave?
I'll mention that now as well. So I'll switch back to Xcode and we'll, back to Keynote, and we'll see if it wakes up in a minute. So imagine that had worked. I've just got a few quick tips if you're doing this in your own app. So coming on to your point, I mentioned earlier on, if you're releasing it to everybody, then you can just set this to true. Again, as you mentioned, you don't want to leave this in here all the time, but we've definitely found it's helpful to leave it in there for at least a couple of releases. If you find an issue with that feature once it's gone out to everybody, this makes it really easy to roll it back in again, because you can just bump this down, do a new build, and nobody sees it again, but the code is all still there for you to work on. If you want to do this in Objective-C, we had that enabled property in our enum. You can't do that in Objective-C because enums can't have properties. So we've just got a simple Objective-C wrapper called feature, and that just calls into the Swift code. So you can just do feature, enabled feature. And finally, in terms of tips, once you've added some feature flags, make sure you test with those feature flags turned off. The example I gave earlier of just adding an option to a menu, that's quite straightforward. You either see the option or you don't. We used feature flags to redo the whole colour scheme of our app, which is obviously quite wide-reaching. So we didn't have too many conditions. It was all contained in one place, but we had cases where we had missed flagging a few things. So people would be testing the app and they'd see some part of the app with completely different colours from the rest of the app. And we hadn't noticed because we always had that feature flag turned on in our local build. So for the users, like the users on the App Store who might not see your feature until it's finished, you need to make sure nothing's kind of leaking out of your conditionals. Let's just check it on Xcode. Wow. Oh wait, I've got could not attach on my other screen. Oh, it's launched. Let's see what's happened. Hooray, I've got a new header. It's still a work in progress. Oh, and it's crashed. This is weird. Okay. Wow. So yeah, so we do have that new header in our debug build.
We saw it.
Yeah. I really don't know what is going on. It's just it's reinstalling it over and over. Is that because I clicked the button loads of times?
Because you're too impatient, aren't you?
Yeah. I did want to do another build in release mode to show you it's not there in release mode, but I think you'll just have to trust me at this stage.
Do you run experiments with features, or are they just like on for everyone or off for everyone?
We don't yet. They're on or off depending on the build configuration. We do have our own A/B testing systems for the web side of things, and we're looking at perhaps introducing that on the mobile side, but it's not something we do right now. Cool. I will switch back to Xcode. So the one more thing, this is where the other enum is used. So it's actually not too many more lines of code. I just added this yesterday to make these things configurable at runtime as well. So within the app settings here, what are you doing, Xcode? I've added a debug option. Okay, let's get rid of you. It won't even. Right, let's just use the simulator.
You couldn't be in a more sympathetic room.
Yeah. Right. Please keep running. So, in the app settings here, I added a section at the bottom called debug, and this just lists out our feature flags. So this is where that description is used to give you a nicer description of it. And now I can go into any one of these, tap it, and that has now overridden that feature flag. If I go back to me, it goes back to the old style. If I go into app settings again, turn it back on, then it goes back to that one. So, so yeah, that's not much. I would show you if Xcode would do anything. It's not much. I just basically store a value and use the defaults. And if it's there, we'll use that one. If it's not, we'll use the build configuration. And that's it. So all of our apps are open source. They're all on GitHub. So if you want to check it out, you can just head to our repository. All the code is there if you want to see how we do it. And that's it. Thank you. I apologise on behalf of Xcode.